It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So my books on spiritual life, those are mine titles.
Okay,
But the
gotcha,
other,
gotcha,
they,
gotcha.
I'm doing one on preaching probably coming up, preaching for life change and discipleship,
Okay,
which I'd like the title to be, but I pretty much guarantee it's going to come out as sticky preaching.
thank you, preaching. Yeah, well, we'll be interested to see how that one grabs and holds us. So it ought to be good. Hey, question that came from one of our pastors. So, what observations would you make about the church, and that's Big C Church, during the pandemic? How do you think the church has done during this time?
Well, first of all, I only know the American church. One of the things that has allowed me to be accessible, as you mentioned, is kind of early on in my ministry, I made some decisions of what I would do and wouldn't do. And it was to focus on a local church, focus, of course, on my family, and then focus on American pastors.
Hmm.
So the reason I've been able to be accessible and still have a family that grew up loving Jesus and glad I was in ministry was I I don't go overseas unless it's vacation and stuff.
Okay.
So I feel like I know the American church and church planting in America well, but the
Yeah.
Big C church, frankly, not that well.
So
But in the
talk a little
American
bit about
church, I
Church
think the
America.
thing, yeah, that has surprised me the most, and I think surprised all of us, is this wasn't, first of all, the disaster we all thought.
Yeah.
And when it came down, everybody thought, how am I going to keep in contact with my people? And anybody with a mortgage or a staff, how are we going to pay our bills?
Yeah.
And both those things have not been anywhere near as hard as we thought. And so that has been, for me, one of my observations about how the church is done. Just as Jesus said, that when he kicks us out of Jerusalem with a great persecution, Acts 8 arising, sure enough, that's not a setback, that's a setup for the expansion of the church and all the things God had immediately right afterward. So I think there's been a lot of good that has come out of that. I've been surprised every now and then of how pleasantly surprised, because it's not as common as I would have thought in this polarized culture. But I still am surprised every time someone confuses the constitutional issues with spiritual issues of what's the best thing for us to do as a church, discipling our people.
Mhm.
Those things get squished together by some leaders that I highly respect,
Yeah,
and I scratch my head. I
yeah,
think the other thing that we've done well is we have realized that the church is not the building, and
yeah.
and for most of us, if you got a church over 150, you're a crowd on the weekend. You're a church when you gather elsewhere. So those would be some of the things. Probably also, uh, I think it was Buffett that said, "When the tide goes out, you know who's not wearing a swimsuit." And when this happened, I think the churches that were most exposed were those that talked about community in small groups, but in reality, it was all about the weekend.
Okay,
Because once
okay.
that was pulled away from them, they really had to scramble.
Yeah, cool.
Here we go. Oop, I got to unmute myself here. So Larry, another question that came in, and leadership obviously is essential and so important. Leaders just have to stand up and lead. Sometimes, even if you're not sure what to do, you have to lead somewhere, right? So, what do you think are some of the qualities in leadership that have been especially important during these last many weeks?
Well, I just put together a talk for, I think it's Leadership Network has something called the Next Normal that they're going to do early in June on an online conference. And I did a little thing for them on it. And it was on exactly that. I think the most significant thing at this point for leadership is what I call both hand leadership. And it sounds easy, but it's incredibly rare. Almost everybody has a bias towards creating the future or protecting the past. And when those two come in conflict, we just immediately go to the one that our heart is. And during disruption events and times of disruption, where you're at that intersection between the old and the new, which I really believe we are, you can't ignore one to chase after the other. The only organization that has only a future to create is a startup. And somewhere within a year to 2 years of being a startup, being a business or a church, it has customers to take care of. It has responsibilities to take care of. And if all of its focus is on the future and none of it is on protecting the past, you have a problem. I was raised in a strongly teetotaler environment. And so Jesus, when he talked, said some things to a wine drinking culture I wouldn't have understood at that point in my life. I knew that if you put they told me if you put new wine in old wineskins, it expands and, all that. But I've asked sometimes rooms full of a huge room of pastors, what else did Jesus say? And they don't know. And he said this, no one who has partaken of the old wants the new. And when I got that, I had to fall on my knees and say, Jesus, forgive me. Because I always thought everybody should be future focused. He's in that passage explaining how people respond to things, particularly the gospel in him. And I always thought in the early days of contemporary music that if you love Jesus, you'll learn to like a subwoofer. And that's just not true. And so I believe one of the most important things is learning to protect the past and create the future. And that would mean you need a champion of both in your organization, because we all do a little of both. But I can look at the history and the major decisions, and I can see whether they're a spiritual IBM that gave away the code to Bill Gates, essentially gave away the code to Bill Gates of PCs because they wanted to protect their mainframe cash cow, or whether they're JCPenney spiritually, that was so into creating the future, it brought in a CEO from Apple, knowing that the past, they couldn't survive the past alone, which was bogus sales, inflated pricing, coupons, all that. And as they put all their focus on the future, they lost all the people who like those stupid coupons. And they still have those bills to pay. And of course, they just recently went bankrupt. And I see churches falling in those two categories. A good leader will find a way to have a champion of both. And eventually, if it is time, will almost, to use again another business analogy, like Apple will cannibalize its current product to create the future. But as it does that, it still has a long legacy of past that it's protecting. So that to me is the number one trait, and it's incredibly rare.
So let me flesh that out a little bit. You talked about both and, having a champion who does the both and. How are you going to do that at North Coast?
Well, I think as an example, North Coast prior to this, we saw ourselves as a local church with 7 local campuses, and we had a scope that reached people who were within 20 minutes of those campuses primarily. And so we were a church with a little over 13,000 showing up at a weekend and 7 local campuses, plus an online presence. I think we're coming out of this thinking of ourselves as an online church with 7 physical locations. And that's a very different thing. In the past, time, money, and best leaders were all into our local place, not a both and. And so if a campus had air conditioner go out, it got fixed right away. If it called and said, hey, we need this or that for the youth ministry or whatever, as soon as we could, we got it done, usually that week. But if the tech team came and said, we really need to upgrade a better switcher so that we can do a better job on our online messages and the stuff we put out, we go, well, maybe let's think about it. And primarily, I think most churches put big L leaders in startups they wanted to grow, campuses or the church or a men's ministry, youth ministry, whatever. But we put shepherds in our online ministries. Somebody who would shepherd the people that were online. And we saw them as a secondary congregation. We didn't put someone there who woke up and would wake up thinking, how do I triple this? How do I do this? How do I do that? So that'd be a really practical example. I think coming out of this, the churches that are going to come out the strongest are going to have a both and ministry. And it's not, every now and then you read these articles as if all the future is online. It's like bull. We need to be a little like Grand Canyon University. What is it? 18,000 students and a beautiful campus, but also 70,000 total online. So they don't ignore either one.
I'm sorry, I have to run with this one just a little bit more in a couple of different directions. So for the average church, how would you encourage them to think about staffing? In the past, it's been, you've got a children's minister, a youth minister, a worship leader. You do those things, maybe small groups. Where does the online person fit in and the whole staffing thinking?
Okay, well, let me step back to what I call that big L leader.
Okay.
A big L leader builds things, a shepherd maintains things, and the body of Christ needs both and needs far more shepherds than leaders. So I don't want to elevate a leader. I just want the right person in the right place.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's another trait of a Big L leader. They have the Tom Sawyer gift. They can get other people to paint the fence and thank them for it. Okay. And so I think we're going to have to pay the dollars to get online focus and technology and all that that's quality, but we want leaders. We don't want a doer who keeps saying, well, if you'll hire me, one more. We want someone who will mobilize people that are part of the priesthood of believers to use their gifts. We want to be a church for Monday, not just a church for the weekend. So I think the church is going to have to hire somebody, whether they outsource it or not, who's really good at it. But they're probably going to have somebody in-house who can raise up all those junior hires who are amazing with graphics and rendering and all of that, and raise up people who have a job in the marketplace in this area and use them more rather than reinventing the wheel. So I think that's where it'll show up. And a small church can do that.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Absolutely.
So Willie, Larry, I've gone off script here a little bit. I don't know. Well, you know what you may want to.
I didn't read the questions ahead of time.
But I just wanted to, and I have another question on that, but I don't want to. So Willie, go ahead.
No, go right ahead. No, go ahead. Yeah, no.
Okay, so just one other question then, Larry. I listened to a different webinar that you had with someone else, or it was some kind of an interview that happened during this whole crisis. And you mentioned that in the second week, what you did was to say, what is it that our people need?
Yes.
And at that point, you said they need to know the church is still here. In the fourth week, you asked the question, what would a good online service look like? And you changed the services that you had been doing so that it was a great online experience. Moving ahead with the both and in mind, how do you have a great worship experience that's physically, for the physical group that gathers, and a great online experience, because you've learned that they're different.
Totally different. First of all, that's where different churches will be able to do different things. When I first came to North Coast Church and it was a church plant, I couldn't offer anything close to what the other churches in town offered. But there was one thing Nancy and I could offer, and that was us. You could visit our church and we'd take you out to lunch or whatever. So accessibility was that. And then later on, now that we're such a large church, I have resources to do different things that I couldn't have done back then. Okay. So what I would say right now is some churches will not be able to offer both things. Their budget is too small, they're too small, but they're still able to think through what is best here. Perhaps record it and decide whether what kind of graphics to use with it or whatever. One thing we're considering here is the idea, we tape on Thursday. And so the idea we're considering is tape the shorter version with the different camera work and all that we do right now on Thursdays. And then having our first service live and live feed to the campuses on Saturday, because the campus experience, you don't want that. You want more of the full body in the sense that you're present. So we're talking about that. Right now, Chris Brown is our lead pastor at North Coast. I'm 1B, if you will. Okay. And so we passed that baton a couple of years ago. And so he's really leading the charge on that we're all discussing. There are a group of us that are on the strategic leadership team and some of the planning. So I don't know exactly how we're going to end up doing it, but that is on the table right now to just add. We've wanted to have a Thursday night service, and you'd be coming to like a studio event, like you do to 700 Club or something. Yeah. And you'd watch us film what's best for it. I realize not everybody can do that, but they still can think, okay, how do we take this and as quickly as possible, make the changes?
Find my strength.
Software, you can do incredible stuff.
Yeah. So find your strength and then think both and.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool.
A very simple one was use 2 cameras. Because online, when we have a campus, we don't want multiple shots because we don't want to remind you're not in the room. People just forget in a minute or two, they're not in the room. But all you'd have to do is use 2 shots that are mixed and put that online. And even that would add more energy and be more appropriate for an online service.
Yeah, just to, again, piggyback on that a little bit, there's a question came in about additional online. I think you were talking a little bit about that, Larry, adding more or different. I'm listening to you, and are you saying or thinking adding the online experience in different time slots? You know, like way back in the old days, multiple
Well,
services
here's what
and
we would
multiple
do.
opportunities.
Yeah, here's what we would do. Description, not prescription, and people can take it for them. But for instance, online, not only does the shot need to be closer, does the energy of shifting, does the sermon need to be shorter? All those things are true. But worship sucks online. Let's be honest. We got a few outliers who are saying, oh, I wish we had more worship, but people don't sing to a screen unless they're musical, you know? And so we know from analytics, they fast forward through it. So we would record as we're doing now, more of a song performance-y thing, one or two songs kind of at the most. And then we would just use other things to say, how do we make it more online focused? And that's what we'd do. But yeah, it'd be kind of two completely different experiences.
Okay, yeah, Doug, go ahead. I'm
No, no.
gonna jump on this next question about the regathering deal, the regathering question, right? So, so many of us, Larry, listened and appreciated, you know, a video. You talked about regathering, and you know, it was quoted to me several times, even today. You know, if you come back, what are you coming back to? Right? You kind of said that, and the quality, children, worship, and so on. So, you know, especially here on the West Coast, across the country, but here in the West, president made a pronouncement or a push. Our own governor has issued some, in California, has issued some standards and so on. What are you thinking about that this week?
Well, we still think they suck. And if anybody wants to see how we communicate it to the congregation, they could go online because Chris Brown, at the beginning of the message, you'd also get a chance to see Christopher Hilton, our third preacher, is just really gifted. But at the beginning of it, Chris Brown did a thing to our congregation saying nothing's changed. It's all the same. We're going to gather together when it's a good experience. What has changed is we are going to be quicker to have watch parties and stuff for those who like that, because we'll do it. But right now, we'd still be restricted to 100 people 100 miles apart. And we don't see any real value to that. And the zillions of services we'd have to accommodate the people. My guess is going forward that at some point when we feel it's not just the worst experience ever, we will do something along these lines. We will provide a Sunday service, socially distanced at 9 or 11 or, you know, whatever, or those two times. And we will announce it along these lines. Hey, we know some of you, it's just so important to come to the building. We've always taught you church isn't the building. You know that we said we're not going to try to gather together until it's a better experience than online. But we know for some of you, it's kind of crossed that point. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a service. But here we want to warn you, it's socially distanced with this. The kids have to be in with this and that. And then whether it's Chris or me, it'll probably be Chris with a little kind of a wink. We'll say, and by the way, except for the weeks I'm preaching, I'm not going to it. I don't think it sounds very good. So we would not devalue the people and we would undercut it on purpose, but we would still be reaching those people who that kind of protect the past and honoring those people who think that's really important. But the truth is, any of our listeners, of you guys and gals that are tuned in right now, you know that the churches that have opened have had dismal attendance and mostly dismal experience outside of the people who love getting together. So
Larry, one of the questions that just came in on the Q&A is, and I don't live in California, so for those of you who are suffering there, you can move to Nevada where it's a little freer at that point. But the question came in about churches that have less than 100 people, because evidently the governor has said that they could gather in some kind of context. Is North Coast planning any kind of regathering with groups of less than 100 people kind of physically?
Again, more watch parties. Only one of our campuses would, even that was over 100, but it was like 120, 100, and I think 70 is the highest it got. So between two services, it could pull that off. And again, if the experience is better, we will.
Yep.
So if you got a church that everybody knows everybody, by that I mean they're not acquaintances, they're community. Because in the world of acquaintances, what happens is you go, man, I recognize your face, but I don't know your name. In a community, you know your name, the spouse's name, and maybe the dog. In an acquaintance world, you say, how you doing? Which means I see you. I'm not really asking. And you say fine, even though you're starting chemo tomorrow.
Right.
In a community, you say, wow, man, or they say, I'm praying for you. So if a church in those early stages has those kind of relationships, then I would think probably getting together, even at social distancing's a cool thing. That's how it is with my family. My kids all live here and go to North Coast campuses, and we're following the social distancing stuff because my wife had cancer and is compromised in her immune system.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's a good experience for us.
Let me say, just as an observation, having been at a couple of events where people know each other pretty well, social distancing is very difficult to pull off. They just kind of move right through it. I think in the store is one thing. When you're at a gathering, it's something very, very different. So, hey, we're going to take a break, but it kind of follows what we've been talking about with the regathering, because last week on the TM conversation, we took a poll, and we, in light of everything that's changing, wanted to take the same poll again. So we're going to put that poll question up right now. And it has to do with when you as a church plan to regather, or how you plan to regather. And we're just letting you respond to that. And then we're going to do a comparison. While you take some, just a few seconds to respond to that, I know Willie has some things that he wants to share with you, and then we'll come back to the poll. Can't hear you, Willie. There we go.
Are we on now? Sorry. So yeah, please take a few seconds, several seconds to take care of that. While you're doing that, just want to remind you, hey, one of the things, again, connect, support. So we hope you're taking advantage of the group page, our Facebook Leaders, TM Leaders page, just to connect, share ideas, and respond and so on to each other. Also, hope you realize and know that our pastor mentor groups continue to meet. And if you're not in one of those pastor mentor groups or group meetings, please get a hold of Doug, anyone, but Doug is sort of the point man on that. So essential to be a part of a smaller group like that. So please do take advantage of that. We'll be talking about next Tuesday in just a few minutes. And I know October sounds a long ways away, but we are even now prayerfully planning to celebrate together our annual get together. It's going to happen in one form or another. We're not sure exactly, but I'm going to take Larry's lead and say, if the experience is going to suck in person, we're not going to do it in person, but we'll do something else instead. All right, let's see how we're doing with this survey.
So just, I don't know if the results are done yet, but it was interesting that last week, we'll start meeting in June, 27% of the respondents said that that was going to be the case. And we plan to regather after June. It was 58%. There is a slight tilt towards gathering earlier, but it's a fairly significant percentage. So just say that I think for some of our churches, because of the announcement, things have changed a little bit. But I think most of our churches are staying the course in terms of where they were before at that point. So, hey, just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them on the Q&A, and we're going to get to those in a moment, and would love to ask Larry the things that you're thinking about.
Hey, let's jump ahead to another question, Larry. Thanks again. Thanks for being with us. So you are the Sticky Church guy with a fresh haircut, by the way. I hope everyone noticed that, because we had all these side bets going on after your promo video about whether you'd show up with a haircut. So thanks for doing that. But anyway, a lot of us know you as the Sticky Church guy, and it's such an important concept. So thinking about churches with all these virtual viewers, how is it that churches need to go after discipling people who are virtual viewers at this point? So how can a virtual church become the Sticky Church?
Okay. Forgive the phone call in the back. It's for the security system, I have to have a phone, and it's always private party trying to sell me something, right? You know how that is. So it'll ring and go off in just a second. So shut up. Well, I think one of the things we have to realize is sometimes we can't do everything perfectly, but we've got to figure out what's good enough. I mean, if you have a prison ministry, that's not the ideal way to disciple people. We can be idealists. I can't do it perfect. I won't do it. But like, hey, man, we'll take what we can get. So I think in this environment, real discipleship, we've turned it into like making super Christians or something. A discipleship ministry in the average church is finding Christians and making them better Christians. Whereas the word in the New Testament means finding non-followers and making them followers, from Saki all the way to the Apostle Paul. I still stretch on, more obedience to do, as he's writing scripture. And so if that's what it is, discipleship needs two ingredients to make it. One is information, which we know can come all kinds of ways. We kept having this idea it's got to be in the church, from a pulpit, on a stage. And people would even, I love the early Video Venue days, people would criticize in writing that you can't communicate to people you're not with. It's like, you've never met the people who are reading this article, or your book. So information can come, we can do just as well if we will do it right. The bigger thing is finding ways of community. And what we need to do is make as much community as we can. So I'm coming out with, I did a couple pop-up Zooms last week, and then just like the one on Don't Gather Together, I'm coming out with later this week, something called Why the Old Metrics Don't Work. And I'll talk about the new ones we need. But when we need more than eyeballs when we do metrics. We need to ask a question: where are these IP addresses coming from? Is there a group of people we can gather together? And then we need to go back to the entrepreneurial church planting, not planning and having someone else do it type of leadership. A good example would be to a pastor, unless your church is thousands, you've got 24 people meeting in a certain part of the country that are watching you online regularly, starting to donate even without you asking for it. You need to contact all of them and say, hey, we'd love to get you in community. I'm going to have a Zoom call for everybody in Nashville that's watching. You catch that? Not, you ought to get in a group. Here's a shepherd who's put together a chart of groups. We're going to have a Zoom call. I'd love to meet you. I guarantee you virtually anybody who could be on it would be on it. Ask them if they want to be in a group thing. Most would say, yeah. Lead the stinking group for a week or two. Get out of your office and actually do frontline people ministry. And then out of that, you'd find a leader and put it together. Or even a very large church like ours could have, Christopher and I could all do something like that, and key leaders. But we can't just tell people what they ought to do. We have to paint by numbers, okay? And we have to pursue. We can't announce, we have to pursue. And that's what every church planter did in the early days. And somewhere around 250 to 300, we lose that and we become an administrator. And people become numbers instead of names and faces with stories. We will not be able to reach people online if we treat them as numbers. But we will be able to treat them if we actually treat them as real people with faces and names and pursuit.
So just a kind of the real church planter mentality to go after those people that are out there and try to figure out in an entrepreneurial way how to reach them. Yeah.
Yeah. See, we lose it, as I said, around 300. I think we make the switch 300 to 400 from people to numbers. What I realized early on in the early days of North Coast Church, somewhere around 200 or so, I couldn't follow up on visitors, but I could follow up on second-time visitors who by definition had something they liked about North Coast Church. I only had so much time, money, and energy. So rather than having just a letter and some form thing goes out to everybody, why don't I find where the low-hanging fruit is and put on my overalls and go pick it? And we just lose that so quickly. And then we wonder why people don't respond.
Yeah, that's so good.
So I'm just wondering if I could jump in here on that, Larry. It's interesting, the last few weeks, it seemed like a lot of pastors have talked about, gosh, I didn't think that we could connect with everyone, or I didn't realize how many people I could actually connect with. And lo and behold, I have, and I am, we are. So in your context, are you finding that either yourself and or other staff people, are you needing to direct them or lead them as it is to to be more intentional about making those connections?
Yeah, the churches that have done it best are much more intentional. Chris, in our case, has done a great job of reminding people you have a new job. You used to have a job description, and most of us have moved into community service or into congregational care bucket. And there is no reason at this point we can't come out of this a better person, having sharpened our saw in whatever skill set we are in, and having even more contact than we used to. This is a golden opportunity to find out what we really think is important in our life. And so I just look at it, well, if you can't do that, you can do this. And there's a lot of important, non-urgent things. Use Stephen Covey's old stuff that we never had the time for. Dude, we got the time now. Let's go get it.
So you talked about the new job descriptions that the staff has. You mentioned one being community service. Was that service to the community outside of the church or in
Yeah.
the church? One of the questions that came in, especially if it's outside of the church, what kinds of need-based, what kinds of needs has the church tried to respond to, during this crisis? Yeah.
Well, it's thrown a wrench into the way we do things. We were missional before it was called missional. We just didn't know it. And prior to this, we average about 4 service projects a day. We have an incredibly robust system of paint by number, getting our people out on things. But many of the things we used to do, we couldn't do. We couldn't go to Solutions for Change and take care of the children while their mom, who's a victim of domestic abuse, is taking classes. I mean, the AIDS, there were so many things we couldn't do. So what we did do, and Connor McFadden, the guy who heads it up, did just a brilliant job of this. He looked around and said, where is there a great need we can do? And let's throw everything into that. Let's not try to do as many things, but something. In our case, it was a food drive, because in all of your communities, you know that people who serve food to the needy are running out of food, already a year's supply. We actually were able to, from 9 to 12 o'clock on all of our campuses a few weeks ago, I think it was 60 tons, by simply telling everybody they're anxious to help, drop it off. We met in gloves and the mask and all this sort of stuff. It was 6 or 7 semis full of stuff. Every organization we worked with was beyond blown away. I think Escondido, the city of Escondido, where we have one of our campuses, had at Christmas time, where everybody cares, this big drive of churches and businesses and the newspaper, you name it, and they got like 20 tons. And we pulled 60, and no, they got 15 tons, and our Escondido campus got 20. So it just was phenomenal. The thing I encourage churches to do is maybe that one or whatever, but pick one thing or two you'll do well, rather than a bunch of things you can't do anymore. I know I do some coaching for some pastors, and one of my clients was concerned, what do we need to do more? I said, well, tell me what you're doing. At the end, I'm laughing. I go, dude, you ought to be consulting people. All they did was take restaurants. And every week they had a restaurant, and they told their people, not that big a church, we want you to go eat there this week, do takeout, and tell them you're from Journey Church and you just want to bless them because they have need. Well, they had a restaurant a week, people getting involved, excited, the tilt that created in the community of these owners who thought, why would a church do this for me? So that the principle is find something and do it well. Be In-N-Out Burger with a limited menu, not Jack in the Box with funny commercials, big menu and no line.
That's great. Hey, so Larry, churches are not able to do quite a few things these past couple of months, clearly. Are there things already that you're seeing that you would suggest churches not pick up and do again when we're able to come back? Don't do it again.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those things we do. I call it mission creep. And what happens is we start out with a mission, but after a while, we don't judge it by whether it's doing the mission. We judge it by whether attendance is growing. I would say a lot of the things we do for the community, we switch the target because the arrows are landing here. So we moved our target over there. Um, there's a lot of camping sort of things. There's a lot of youth things. There's vacation Bible school things. There's all of these things we do. And the idea we're getting the gospel out to young children, and we're touching families who are going to come for like a weekend thing, and maybe they'll come to Jesus and come to church. And in reality, it's just a system all the homeschoolers have figured out to get cheap care for their kids that week. And you go and you say, where's the fruit in the last 10 years of people who came to know Jesus or came to our church? 0 or 2. And that same time, money, and energy used elsewhere would be pretty powerful. And I think every church has those legacy things that at one point was tried or at one point actually worked, and now has a fan club. So therefore it just keeps going because of that. And I think it's probably different in every church.
So how do you have
We've
that
got a few,
conversation?
I won't name them because
Yeah. Really? Come on.
but here's where this is a great opportunity. It is so much better to not bring something back than to kill it off.
Well, that's the thing. Maybe we have an opportunity now,
Golden.
right? So what is the filter that you run these things through, the sieve or something, to not bring them back? Is it a mission?
Very
Is it a mission
simple.
thing? Evangelism? What is it?
Well, mission is what you're comparing it, but there's a simple question. If we didn't have it, would we start it?
Okay.
It's as simple as that. If we weren't doing, like, that's why we don't do a lot of things other churches do, because we constantly are asking the question, if we didn't have it already, would we start it? And there's a bunch of stuff churches have done forever. We don't. I mean, we don't provide holiday entertainment for the community because we learned early on that they come that weekend, and if the show's really good, they'll come next Christmas Eve. But they don't show up in January. So we go, well, we'll let all the other churches do that. We'll just have a crappy little thing to get people off our back. Our people will all go somewhere else on Christmas Eve, and they'll all be back the first Sunday in January. And we saved a whole lot of time, money, and energy. We do that for all kinds of things.
Yeah. So you're pretty relentless in terms of assessing stuff against your mission, in terms of, is it bringing people to Christ? Is it bringing people back into the church? And if not,
but you have to be people focused, because if you do this only future focused, you're going to take a machete to things that still have a life.
Okay.
And if you really have a heart of a shepherd, there's nothing wrong with doing some things simply because people are used to it, they love it, whatever. We need to honor people. If we become so missional that people don't matter to us anymore, or the only congregation that matters is the one we're trying to reach, not the one we have, we're not really a pastor anymore. So that's why I started with those words of Jesus. You don't want to be ruthless with this stuff, but you also don't want to suck away serious time, money, and energy on stuff that doesn't work.
Okay. So that what you just said is huge. And, to have the heart of a shepherd and be able to see where people are at, while at the same time keeping everything on mission. Can you give us an example of something that you said probably isn't all that, how can I put it, core to what we're doing in terms of the mission at the church, but it was so meaningful to our people, we are still doing it?
Yeah, okay. And by the way, to make a shameless plug for one of my books, Lead Like a Shepherd is that. It was the book in which I tried to say, how are you an assertive, mission-focused leader, but at the same time, as Peter says, shepherding the flock among you,
Okay.
not falling in love with the flock you want to get one day.
Okay.
But our traditions service is a good example of that. We have the multiple venues, and we have something called Traditions on our main campus, because the people who planted North Coast Church still matter. And 40 years ago, they were 40 years old. Now they're 80, 90 years old, and they matter to Jesus. I can't remember the last time somebody came to Jesus in that service. It's been a really long time.
Oh.
But why do we have to tell these people we don't like you anymore?
Okay.
We don't care. I will. When we go back to when we started Traditions, I was more than willing to take care of their needs as long as they weren't going to sabotage our ability to create the future. See, as you take care of those who honor the past, there's one group you can't let have a voice, And that's those people who want to live in the past and not let anybody go into the future. And by the grace of God, we just had such incredibly cool older people who hate a subwoofer, don't like it very loud and all that, but walk by the edge and peek in, and their heart just burns with joy to see all those young people there. They just say, please don't make me go there.
But I think what you said right there is just huge. They appreciate something about the past and the traditions that have been apart, but they're going to allow the future to happen, and they're not going to throw a rock.
And it's a both and. I couldn't have made it, we couldn't blend it.
Yeah.
Here's two hymns, and now we got the Intelligent Lights and the hazers. I always said a blended service is a great way to make sure nobody's happy.
Yeah. Just a question that has come in about caring for staff during this season. Have there been any unique things that the church has done to try to care for staff? And maybe kind of on the shadow side of that, has there been concerns about the accountability of staff doing their work, since they have been working from home?
Each campus pastor has watched carefully over their staff. Chris Brown has taken that upon himself. That's more his role than mine in this. I'm teaching and leading part of the strategic leadership team. So I think Chris has done a fabulous job of making sure he's in contact with the various groups that are on our Vista campus. Plus we have a Vista campus pastor. So we're taking care of staff, saying, are you taking care of your people? And campus pastor, you taking care of your staff? How about your key volunteers? How about your key donors? How about your key small group leaders? How about, and making sure that's done. And that's just a matter of time, which we all have. On the accountability question, we try to hire people that you have to pull back, not people you have to light a fire under.
Yeah.
And, we hire people to do a job, not to put in hours.
Yeah.
If you're the receptionist, you have to be there the hours it's open. If you're part of facilities, you have to be there but on most jobs, it's a job to do. And if you can do it in 5 hours, more power to you. If it takes you 45 hours, well, I'm sorry, you're in the slow group. But at that point, we don't worry a lot about accountability, because when you do that, you get a watchdog mindset on top.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse to the morale of a team when either HR, accounting, or in a smaller church, the head pastor is seen as someone who's trying to catch you doing something. Okay, so we would focus on how come you didn't do what you were supposed to do, not why were you napping all day? Because if you did what you're supposed to do, it's great.
Good.
By the way, let me add something. The watchdog supervisor role is a morale killer in every environment. And all the pastors on this call, that when your board is at its worst is when it's got its watchdog hat on to make sure nobody gets away with an extra day of vacation, instead of how can we help you fulfill your calling and our mission. So
yeah, that's just a great word for us, Larry. I appreciate that. I just want to go backwards just a little bit, because I want to catch a question. I think it came in from Jim out in Arizona. He was talking, you commented about, online with multiple campuses, multiple venues. His question was, what do you see as the potential downside of kind of multiplying and scattering out like that in the multiple campus but online format? Are there concerns you have downsides to that?
Not particularly. Obviously, there's always concerns. I mean, the Apostle Paul, all the churches he planted went sideways. That's why he had to write those letters. So I think sometimes we get this idealistic thing, if we do everything right, everything goes well, and it hasn't from time immemorial. I think one of the weird things that caught me when this first happened is how many pastors took the principle of Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, forsake not the gathering of yourselves together, and thought it was to come to the event. But Hebrews 10:24 starts out this way: consider how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting. And the environment that was given to was a non-mobile culture in which it was all house churches, because you're going to be small. Any of you here with us today who've been to the Holy Land, I'm sure you were shocked as I was when you see that first synagogue, how tiny it is. Things were tiny. It was Mayberry, USA. Everybody knew everybody's business. And I love the fact we can have campuses, big buildings, lots of services and all that, because the big buildings, big gatherings allow me to reach more people with a better experience that creates easier come and see evangelism. But it's not the church. And so I just don't see a downside of small little gatherings for until mobility came into our culture. That's all most churches were, just a small handful. And then in urban areas, you'd have a Spurgeon show up or somebody with, one of the first mega churches or whatever. But mostly, most of your you guys originally were American Baptist, right? In roots, yeah. So all the constitutions and bylaws were written for churches of 120 neighborhood little groups. And so I don't see a particular downside in that structure. If you took away large group gatherings, I would be disappointed. I love them. They have some very good fruit, but it's not the church. It's not the church.
Is there then a way, Larry? I mean, is there a culture then that needs to be set so that in these smaller groups, and they need to share the same culture, the mission or something, don't they? I mean, what keeps them together?
Well,
right?
again, ideally, but like I said, a prison ministry, I can't do everything I'd want to do, but I'm still going to bring the gospel. And so my goal with people online is, first of all, let's understand most people double and triple dip. And we used to act like we own people, and you're being a traitor if you go over to XYZ church on Sunday night for this. And that is so damnable and right out of the pit. We are nothing more than elective Sunday school classes in his great church in our community. And we're tiny little castles in his kingdom. And we've got to change our leadership mindset that we own people instead of we're privileged to serve them. Starbucks doesn't care if I quit going to this one and start going to that one. Now, the manager of this one cares, but Starbucks doesn't care. And they don't care when I start going to Seattle's Best because they own that too. And if only we had that mindset. And so if I can't get people into a community, I'm going to tell them, find a local church. And let's say one of our strengths is as a teaching church. Every church has its strengths. So we often hear, I can't find teaching like I got at North Coast. We go, great. Well, then keep listening to us. But find fellowship better than you're going to get from 1,000 miles away, and find a chance to serve better than you're going to get. And let's link hands and be in this thing together. And so I think that mindset has to change with us, thinking, though, we're only going to serve when we can do everything. And we can control the environment.
I know that our time is almost over and Willie's going to wrap it up, but maybe one question, Larry, that's come in on the Q&A. In addition to obviously sermons, the worship, and groups, small groups, is there other kind of content that we can put online in a helpful way in your mind?
Well, children's things and all that. And again, that has to do with your ability. Can you do it well, or are you better off pointing to something else that's already been done? I do think as we move it in the new world, we have to realize people are going to be busy again. And we don't want to provide too much stuff. We want to provide connection. We definitely want metrics, like I was talking about briefly. We have to figure out the metrics that know the difference between eyeballs and engagement. With limited time, money, and energy, focus on those where we can have engagement and really be some part of iron sharpening iron. It's going to be hard to do evangelism and really know, because the step of communicating it is there's friction, one more step to go through. But again, most people come to the Lord slowly anyway, 4 to 7 significant steps in their life before they really go, I'm all in. Yeah. I'm always amazed in the Gospels. Jesus did not walk up to strangers and say, come and follow me. When he said, come and follow me, it was an informed decision of people who had heard of him, watched him, seen him, and then they dropped it all. So maybe we're just part of the process. That's okay. If I can be the whole process, I want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so, we, again, Larry, thank you so much for your time. So appreciative, and your generosity with leaders. Thank you. So, one of the things each week we just say, hey, you've been chatting with us for a little while, and so if you were to give a parting thought or challenge or observation, what would it be?
Stay flexible. You asked earlier about the kind of leadership needed in this time. And you need leadership that has a direction, but it's got to be a game plan, not a blueprint. Some of us by nature are blueprint leaders. We get away, we plan, and boom, we've got it all figured out. It doesn't work in times of disruption and times of change. You got to be like a coach with a game plan who thinks they're going to go do this, but all of the team knows. They're not panicked when there's change because everybody's aware. They're using phrases like "for now" or we're keeping open. Make sure people know that, because if you're going to be a good leader, you are going to make changes you don't perceive coming up right now at all, numerous times in the next year or two. There's a whole bunch of stuff. If we had more time, I could give you that. Had you asked me 4 months ago, I would have said, I don't think so. Nope, that won't work. Nope, that's a bad idea. And now I'm going, oh, that's a good idea. I think it was Bezos that's credited with saying the people who are right most of the time are people who change their mind a lot.
Oh,
Fascinating, fascinating. So I'm going to ask you, Larry, continue to give it some thought and like write a blog or do a something somewhere that we can have access to, because I'm fascinated by your both and concept, right? Because I think as leaders, all of us tend to be one or the other, right? You talked about that. We're either the blueprint guy or we're the, this. And so, and maybe that's a shifting balance, but I'm fascinated by that. Clearly you're correct. So write about it and put it somewhere so we can get back to
I
it.
actually have written some about it. I can tell people 2 places to get it.
Great, please.
In Sticky Leaders, which came out as a crossover book of business called Innovation's Dirty Little Secret. But pastors, business people bought it, but pastors think more about change than innovation, and they don't buy hardcovers. So it came out, 10 sentences were changed. Ones that talked about innovation say change and innovation, that's all. But it's called Sticky Leaders, and it's really about change and innovation, and it walks through that kind of process. And then that's a part of my little 9-minute or 10-minute thing that I've got on Leadership Network's Next Normal that's coming up, I think, June 2nd.
Super. Yeah.
So, and I'll probably do another one of those things like I did Don't Reopen Until. That thing just blew up. It's like over 40,000 views. It's like
that's it. It's gold, Larry. Keep that stuff up, and we'll keep pushing it out to our leaders. And I think every day is a different day. We're trying to do the best thing we can do and be found faithful, right? So that's what we're really trying to do. So again, we want to thank you. And if you're tuned in, just remind you next Tuesday, Lord willing, we'll plan to be back for another TM conversation. And an area, if you're not thinking about this, you better, and that is, what are we going to do with children's ministry? So our topic next week is effective children's ministry. And our panelists, our experts, guests are Amy Hall from Beach Point, and Pastor Amy Hall from Beach Point Church, and the director, Lauren Johnson from Grace Church in Las Vegas, and Director Jennifer Enriquez from Christ First in Covina. So 3 leaders that are really thinking creatively and taking care of business with effective church ministry. So it's one of the really, really important things that we have to think about before we open, but even if we're going to reopen, when we're going to reopen, but even now, what can we do to minister effectively to children? So thanks for being a part of our conversation. Larry, thank you again. Doug, thank you. God bless you, leaders. Thanks for your faithfulness.
Thank you.
Thank you.